Jenny Critchlow.
Morning, everybody, and welcome to today's podcast with me, Jenny Critchlow. Why now? It's Monday morning again, and wondering how you're feeling, how you're getting on in there. Last week we talked about beginning to notice, and then perhaps noticing what it was like to live inside of you, and suggested that perhaps living with you living with you, may be quite an uncomfortable thing to do. We had a flatmate, if you like, that became, or you may have begun to notice, might not be the most helpful person you've ever lived with. So I left you with beginning to look at, if this person that you live with in your head, all these thoughts, is quite a difficult person to live with, is there a point where you can begin to interrupt this person and perhaps change a tiny few things about what it is that makes life so difficult? So how have you got on this week, whether you've managed to do that? And I'm wondering whether you're noticing how often you are this roommate, where we disappear off and we're lost in that train of thought and we don't wake ourselves up to it. When I'm teaching meditation, one of the things I suggest to people is that they imagine their thoughts like a stream. So our thoughts are never going to go. We're not asking you, I'm not asking you to be free of those thoughts. That's sort of impossible, because as you notice more and more what your thoughts are doing, as you can notice them, these thoughts exist independently of you. There's a you that notices the thoughts, and there's the thoughts. Therefore, they're not really you at your essence. So, as you're noticing these thoughts, or let's say we're doing beginner's meditation, what I ask is that if you see these thoughts as a stream, it's much easier to allow them to be, just to be there in your head, flowing in one side and out the other. And the idea is, as we begin to learn to meditate, say, or be mindful, other people use that term, is that you can build a bridge over those thoughts and stand on the bridge and become the observer of them. So when the beginners meditators are starting, the suggestion is that most of this meditation might be you off in your thoughts. But the moment you notice that you are dissolved into these thoughts and you've become these thoughts and those thoughts become your reality, that moment is a true moment of awakening, of noticing. You lift yourself out of the stream and go, oh, God, I was there again, and I'm meant to be focusing on now. That's a magical moment. That may well be the first moment that we've ever had of noticing that our thoughts aren't real and we have a choice not to be in them. And as you've probably noticed over the last few weeks, those thoughts are repetitive. Very rarely are they new and interesting. I had one student once who misunderstood a little bit my analogy of the stream. So your thoughts are a stream through your head, everybody, and build a bridge, and you can be the observer of the thoughts through meditation, but you don't go into them. And off this group went for a week and came back the next week. And what this student had thought was that I'd said, what you do is you have a stream in your head and you throw all your negative thoughts into the stream, which I hadn't said at all. But wow, do some students come up with some better stuff. And this was brilliant. She spent the whole week taking every negative thought that she could be conscious of and flinging it in the stream to be got rid of in her head. And she'd had really a quite nice week. So that has become something else I suggest. It isn't necessarily a way of being peaceful with our thoughts, which is what the bridge does. But it does give you a useful place to stick all the thoughts you're no longer wanting. And then last night I was finishing a meditation group, actually, it was their last week. And one of the things I'd said in discussion, we discuss everything all the time, and so lots of bits come out in discussion. And what I'd said last week was we were talking about how we are peaceful in relationships, in difficult relationships where there's conflict or old feelings and new feelings and really difficult things going on that are unspoken even. Is what do we do about that, Jenny? If you've got a difficult relationship with your mom or with your teacher or with your auntie or with, I've said all females there, haven't I? With your dad or your uncle or your best friend or your husband or your spouse or all the people we have relationships with. What do we do about that? And we were discussing about you cannot change anybody else's perception or reality. That's not possible. And what we all really want to do is get everybody else to see our point of view and to see that we are indeed right and behave accordingly. And my line that I said was, you are 50% of every relationship you ever have. So no more, no less. So often we think that people are more dominant in a relationship or that we're more dominant. But even your local post officer that delivers your mail, you are 50% of that relationship, even if it's just a wave over the gate. You're 50% of it. And what this student heard that I saw last night was you only own 50% of any conversation. Which gives me two wonderful things to look at here is that one, we hear what we want to hear. Two, often what we want to hear, if we look at it carefully enough, is really useful to us. And this student went off for a week and has had a really interesting week watching herself in conversation and understanding to herself that she's only 50% of this conversation, of this interchange. And then she began to notice whether or not she was trying to control this conversation. Do I already have an agenda about where I want it to go? Am I steering it? Am I allowing myself to get involved here so that I get what I want? And whatever her answers there were really immaterial. It was more that she had found a teaching that really worked for her at this stage of her life. And one I've told her that I'm stealing for this podcast. So thank you very much, students. It was a fascinating way of looking at it. We are only 50% of any exchange. So while I would say you're 50% of every relationship, what the student saw was that she was 50% of any conversation. And actually a relationship and a conversation are both exchanges between people. And so we take full responsibility for our 50%. The other 50% beyond belongs to the other person entirely and is nothing to do with us. And so with both of these teachings, students hearing something slightly differently or quite differently to what it is I thought I meant, allowed them to practice in their own way, a new way to interact with either their thoughts or with other people. And through that came more awakening about how they were, how they operated. The student with the stream analogy found that she had a lot of negative thoughts she could throw into the stream, but also saw how easily they were disposed of. And that the ones she didn't dispose of so easily were ones she probably needed to look at about why she held on to them so dearly. And the student that took responsibility solely for her 50% of the conversation noticed that what we give other people is responsibility for where we want this conversation to go. Which brings me to that point that I made just before this, is that we cannot change other people in any way. Even listening to this podcast, maybe over the last few weeks, you've begun noticing things a little differently, or behaving a little differently, or just treating yourself a bit more nicely. And when we find a new way of doing something, and especially when it benefits us and we're excited about it, what we really want is other people to start doing it too. So this person we have a difficult relationship to, if only you knew what I knew, then we could be doing this together and we would all get on. But nobody learns anything until they're ready to learn it. We don't actually teach anybody anything. We simply allow them the space for it to emerge in and of itself. so that there is a build up to the point where they are ready to learn whatever it is. And you don't know, they might already know what you know. You just haven't been ready to hear it. You know, it's like saying to a 5-year-old, God, you know, why can't you do algebra? It's just X and Y. And if X is 10 and Y is 5 and you add them together, you get 15. Can you not see that? You know, well, no, I'm 5. I'm doing my alphabet, and I'm quite excited about maybe doing the 2 times table. If any 5-year-old is excited about doing the 2 times table, not sure where that analogy came in, guys. Anyway, I don't think any 5-year-old is excited about the 2 times table. Forget that bit. Either way, we're a 5-year-old and we're criticising this 5-year-old for not being able to do algebra. And yet eventually a 5-year-old will learn 5 and 10, will learn to add it together, and one day we'll be able to substitute X for one number and Y for another and add them together and understand that concept. But like everything in life, life comes incrementally and learning comes incrementally. And there are 7 billion people on the planet and we're all learning in our own time. And my invitation to you this week is to think about what you may have learned in whatever way, whether it's from bits of this podcast, whether it's from noticing, a lot of our learning just comes from being still enough and brave enough to look at it as it is, rather than how we want it to be. So having a look at what we may have realised over the last few weeks and beginning to notice what we're learning and not asking it of other people. Because whatever you're learning, someone else already knows it and they didn't ask it of you, hopefully. And in turn, you grow and maybe the relationships around you change because you grow. And so what happens is, as we begin to change the relationship within and to ourselves, so with the invitation to notice, with the invitation to begin to understand and look at this terrible flatmate we may live with the invitation to change a little bit of how you are with yourself. And then noticing with this week's podcast how much we maybe try and ask it of other people. We're simply beginning to change how we are inside with the world. And I ask you to begin to notice whether the outside changes a little. And to understand that we don't ever change it by force. People learn incrementally. So this week, let's all try and be soft with the other people in our lives while we allow the learning, the new algebra that we're experiencing, to emerge within us. It's been lovely chatting to you today. I will see you next Monday. Enjoy a softer week.